So this is album number 5, and the album title is Cortisol 22. It's a medicalized album. Late 2021, I had a heart attack and found myself in hospital. So the album's about being in hospital. It's about being a voyeur in the hospital system, being medicalized, becoming part of the hospital's daily rhythms. And up until that point, some of you may already know that I was quite a competitive athlete. So having a heart attack was a bit of a blow to me. So obviously you go through an awful lot of emotions, and I remember my son coming in to see me. My son was only 3 at the time. He really didn't understand what was going on, and he saw his dad in hospital in pretty bad shape, and he was very upset. And I was even more upset at watching him be upset, because there was absolutely nothing I could do. So one thing I asked my wife to bring in was my laptop and my keyboard. And I thought, okay, well, I'm not sure how long I'm going to be in here, but I might as well start documenting in the only way I know how, which is making music. Well, the recording equipment that I brought in is pretty minimal. I mean, I work primarily with a laptop and a mini keyboard and some pretty fancy headphones. I think they're used to seeing laptops and probably headphones, but they're certainly not used to seeing little piano keyboards. But yeah, I don't think they took a lot of interest. It's really interesting being in hospital for any length of time, because you really start to become part of the hospital rhythms. The doctor comes at a certain time, the nurses come at certain times, the food comes at a certain time, the meds come at a certain time, and you can almost, run your clock by it. That's their main shtick, really. They're there to make you better. And what I'm doing on my computer in my hospital bed doesn't concern them that much. What they didn't know was that I was occasionally pressing record on my mobile phone, just recording pieces of atmosphere and just discrete pieces of conversation to try and record some of the soundscape that was inside that hospital. And hospitals are really noisy places. Unbelievable. I mean, if you think about noise pollution, and you think about a freeway, that's noise pollution. Go to a hospital, they're just as noisy. There are doors banging and doctors and nurses sort of having really loud conversations. There are bells and whistles and machines going off. It's a really unhealthy place to be sound-wise. And even at night, there's still quite a lot of noise going on. It's quieter. But yeah, I really think that hospitals should think about their noise pollution policies, because they're not really designed to help you get better. So that's quite something that I learned. So I had to record some of that. So I hope I don't get into trouble. Yeah, so the pandemic was very large and present the whole way through the process. The second time I was in hospital, I was isolated because of the nature of why I was ill. I didn't have COVID, I had something else. But yeah, and the hospitals themselves, it was very crowded. It was the first time I'd been into hospital and not had a private room, because there was just no beds. And the staff themselves were very, very much overworked and stressed, and you could see it every day on their faces. I think, one of the reasons the album became called Cortisol 22, so it was a play on words, COVID-19, Cortisol 22. 22, it came out in 2022, and cortisol because of my emotional and mental reaction. My levels of cortisol in my own personal system were very apparent, and I could feel them on a daily basis going up and down depending on how well I was or how sick I was that day. And I really learned about the fact that we're not just biological beings, we're very much attached to our emotional and our mental state, and we can, that's why levels of cortisol became so important to me. I knew that I had some control over my well-being if I just attended to my own well-being and emotional state while I was in hospital. The doctors generally don't consider that as important as the biological state. And that's something else I discovered while I was in hospital. Yeah. Bright Star. I think it's a song about hope. So one of the things about being in hospital, I'll spin that on its head a bit actually. I had a fan who listened to the album, and he was very good with words, and he wrote a review of every track. And at the end of it, he sort of did a bit of a summing up. And he said, the album feels very hopeful, but it also feels like you're helpless. And I was a very perceptive man, and I thought, well, that's so accurate, because when you're in the care of a hospital and you're ill, you are feeling very helpless. You're at their mercy, if you like, and the mercy of the universe to make you better. But hospitals are very hopeful places, and they're there to help people, get better and recover and get on with their lives. And I think throughout this particular year of health challenges, I think I managed to keep a bright star within myself, just going forward. I knew that as long as I stayed positive and I kept doing what I was meant to be doing, which at that point was making music, because I didn't know what else to do. So bright star is sort of a metaphor for positivity, and also I suppose a metaphor for hope while you are in hospital. Yeah, I think one of the tracks that always sticks in my mind is the track Once a Day. And I've noticed that it's becoming quite popular on some of the streaming platforms with no real push from me. And Once a Day is about that medicalization of your life while you're in hospital. And I developed some good relationships with the nurses, because I'd see them every day. Usually 3 or 4 times a day they'd come in. And just that phrase, once a day, for me it's representative of the nurse, one of the particular nurses that used to come in, and she'd have this box of medications, and she'd say, this one's 3 times a day, this one's twice a day. And there was just this one phrase where she said, this one just once a day. And for some reason it sort of immortalised the moment of being medicalised and being subject to all their charts and the medications that they have to give you. It's their job to give you medications, and you're not really allowed to say no. And they get quite funny if you say, can I just take one of those? I don't want to take 2 today, I think they're a bit strong. And you're in their system, and they're there to help you, but you feel like once a day for me was like being a voyeur inside a system. It felt very voyeuristic. And the other thing about being in hospital is the fact that they don't like you walking anywhere. So I was in the ward I was in on the second time I was in hospital. I was in a geriatric ward, not because I'm geriatric, but because there was no room anywhere else. It's COVID. And I was the only ambulant patient on the ward. So everybody else, it would be like the movie Wall-E, where everybody's lying in their beds and they're being wheeled around on these motorised beds. And some of them are quite overweight. And I didn't have a motorised bed, but I had a wheelchair. And when I had to go to various parts of the hospital, I couldn't walk. I could walk, but I wasn't allowed to walk. So I got put in this wheelchair, and I had a very kind gentleman, I think they're volunteers, that push you around to your various appointments. And again, I was a voyeur. I was in my box seat, which is the single from the album. And the box seat was about me being pushed around this hospital in this wheelchair. But it speaks to that weird sense of voyeurism and medicalization. I was perfectly capable of walking, but I wasn't allowed. So I suppose one of the things, when you spend a lot of time in hospital, you reflect, and you reflect on your life. Because my first time in hospital was a very definite brush with mortality. I was lucky to get through it. So when something like that happens to you, you become very reflective. So I'm originally from the UK, from London, and I went back to a time in my mind when I was working and living in London, and I used to ride my push bike around London. And one of my favourite pastimes was riding my push bike late at night around London with lights on my head, and just driving around the streets, riding around the streets, because it was so much fun. That there wasn't much traffic around. You could ride the back streets. It was always cool. The air was always cool, and I just liked being in the city on my push bike late at night and feeling the throb of the city. And one of the reasons I loved living in London was the reggae culture, especially the dub reggae culture. And you'd often cycle past nightclubs or venues, and you'd hear this pumping beat. It wasn't always dub, it might be dance, it could be anything. And as you cycle past it, the sound comes and goes in the wind, and then you're on to the next bar or the next street. So inner city dub is about that experience of when I was much healthier, when I was able to cycle around a big city. I was very fit. I had no fear, and it was a reflection on an earlier life when I was younger, and I was very healthy. And I suppose I was escaping to those moments earlier in my life, because at that point in my life I was in a hospital bed, not feeling very well. Crypto calm. Okay, so crypto calm was actually something I started looking at while I was in hospital, because 3 days before I had the heart attack, I lost my job. I was made redundant, and so I didn't have an income anymore. So I started looking at other ways of making money. And you get, when you lose your job and you become redundant, you look at anything. And I've always been quite good with charts and statistics and stocks and things. So I thought, and this was when 2020 crypto was going bananas. So I thought, I'll have a look at this. I'd been used to trading stocks and shares. And stocks and shares are quite slow and gentle, and it's kind of quite a conservative way to maybe try and earn a bit of money. But crypto was very, very volatile indeed, and you could lose a fortune in 5 minutes. You've got to understand that I'm trying to recover from a major adverse health event, and I'm writing music. Half the time I'm in a hospital, and the other half the time I'm looking at crypto charts, and I'm obviously getting really stressed out, because crypto is very, very stressful, and even more stressful if you're thinking of turning it into a profession. So I really wasn't doing myself any favours. So I had to limit the amount of crypto I was doing while I was in hospital, and it was really just a piece of irony. I think by the end of it, I just thought, I really can only do short blasts of the crypto, because it certainly isn't calm at all. It's quite the opposite of calm. And when I turned off the charts at the end of the day, that's when I got my crypto calm, I guess. And the track was, I think the track was written. So I think on my workstation I had 2 windows open, and one window the charts were flickering up and down. On the other side of the window was my audio workstation. And there was a lot of interaction. 1 minute I'd be looking at the crypto charts, the next minute I'd be going, what's that bass riff doing? And it was just far from calm. But it was making me produce interesting music. And I think the end of that track, I decided that the track would have to be calm to try and balance out the volatility of the emotion that comes with crypto trading. One of the things I found, the album's only been out a couple of weeks, but I've been getting lots of messages from fans saying they've been talking about the way that they feel emotionally about the record. And that's the first time I've had this happen. People don't generally talk about how records in the past have affected them emotionally. And I think, having put it out there in my press that this album was a result of my ill health, I think that almost gave people permission to tell me how they felt emotionally when they were listening to the album and what sort of feelings it brought up. So thank you for that, because it is a real, some people have been so perceptive about the emotions that they get from the songs, and it's been fascinating for me to hear their feedback at that real visceral emotional level. You don't normally get that from people, your fans or people that like your music. So that's been amazing. So please keep sending me your heartfelt feedback about the music, good or bad. I can take it on the chin.